Hi there. Trying to have a little bit better starting face on the one that I'm posting than what I had on that first one. Oops. I'm back. This is Dr. Moore, and we're going to talk about your first week's readings and the material just to give you an introduction and what's required of you this first week. Now, keep in mind, this is a short week, so there's not as much information that we'll cover in other Watch Me's because this material is shorter. Keep in mind that yes, you do need both the book and the PowerPoints. You can't do it without both because the PowerPoints just give you, the salient issues of the chapters and or as we call them there, the units. So this introductory, though, should be fairly simple, and you will have two forum questions this week. I switched the order on purpose because I wanted you to get into it first, then the second one, which will go up probably on Wednesday, and I'll give you a little bit extra time on that first one that I posted, is to introduce yourself to the class more, and there'll be a couple of specific questions that I ask you to do in that introduction about persuasion. So let's begin by looking at what the reading for the week is, which is chapter 1. Chapter 1 is an introduction to the field of persuasion. Keep in mind that when we talk about persuasion, we're talking about influencing others. We're talking about trying to affect some change. It could be a change in opinion. It could be a change in behavior, in beliefs. It could be a change in any sort of thing. When you try to get somebody to change, that is persuasion or influence. And so that's what we begin by looking at with this course and with this chapter. The reading isn't horrible, so make sure you do it. They're pretty good about being. They explain things well, so it's a good textbook for that. It's a good textbook for an online class because they do explain things well. The first thing in that first chapter has to do with the necessity and challenge of persuasion. And what that deals with is, why do we need to study persuasion? Well, because we face it every day. A lot of you all are advertising majors or PR majors, comm studies majors as well. And yes, I know there are some minors and folks who aren't even majors in our department. You're just taking it so you can get some hours during the summer. And but it doesn't matter what you hope to do because all of us face persuasion, right? If not, talking to somebody, advertisements. And we see a lot of that in the media. So we'll talk also about how media affects us as we go along. As the textbook puts it, communication is a pervasive vehicle for all human beings. We all use it, we all experience it. So keep that in mind. And because all of us use it, there's where the challenge comes in. How? What works? What doesn't work? So we begin this by looking back at some of the ancient philosophers like Cicero and Aristotle. Cicero and Aristotle talked a great deal about it. Aristotle's point was that that rhetoric was defined as persuasion. That's what we were always about when we were communicating publicly. You got to keep in mind that Aristotle's model was back in the ancient days where they stood in the square and gave speeches and tried to persuade people about things in politics and the government. And that was the model that they used. And then Cicero comes along after Aristotle and starts telling us how we should go about that. And so some of you all who have studied public speaking, or those of you in my comm theory class will see this more than once. Cicero had the 5 canons of speech: the invention, the the arrangement, the research step, the delivery, memory, and those kinds of things. So the primary goal of persuasion will be to get people to change, and that's the bottom line. So you have to start asking yourself, what triggers people to change? Think about yourself. What triggers you to make a change? And I'll ask some questions about that in the forum questions. The first forum question deals some with that. What triggers you to change? And I picked that topic on purpose because a lot of people have changed their opinions. The first post under that was an example of some changing ideas, but you might not change 100%. I want you to keep one thing in mind. They don't talk about this much in the textbook. I do talk about it in the PowerPoints, but persuasion is never a one-shot deal. There have to be many messages that get the person to the point of making that change. All right. So that's an important aspect of that. So what triggers us to change? All right. And keep in mind, persuasion comes in many different forms. All right. It can be silent treatment. That could be a form of persuasion. So there are lots of different ways that we persuade. And we'll look at those this session. We'll look at the different things that people do along the way. Another aspect about persuasion and the primary goal of that is that you're going to want to take account of what makes you more susceptible to persuasion or what makes you less susceptible to persuasion. You'll pay attention to that. There are lots of times where we're going to get into this, the dissonance, where we have some different opinions about, if we're here and I want to persuade you to do something, do I want you to come up here? Do you want me to come down there, or do we want to meet in the middle? So, there are just all kinds of things that you begin to pay attention to when you look at the actual persuasion techniques. You have to keep in mind that persuasion occurs in many different contexts. Don't lose sight of that. It occurs in many different contexts. So then if we look at how we define persuasion, and you'll see a huge discussion about this in the PowerPoint, so I won't go into great detail here, but the bottom line is persuasion is about getting people to make change. It may be trying to get somebody to comply with you, so we'll talk about compliance gaining strategies that people who are trying to persuade people do, and that's something that you do. Think about things like propaganda. There are all kinds of different ways, things that different people use. Another aspect of the definition beyond change and how do we get there. There are some folks, by the way, and you'll hear this, that say there's no one definition of persuasion. There are many different definitions of persuasion. Your textbook authors don't limit themselves to one specific approach of talking about behavioral change only, whereas some theorists did. Woodward and Denton look at things that cross over into many different areas. Could be attitude, beliefs, values. It's not just getting a behavioral change out of people. And you'll see the PowerPoint goes into great detail about the definition. So you'll want to pay attention to that and what we do there. And they give the 5 elements of persuasion from Woodward and Denton, who are your textbook authors' position, and that's in the PowerPoint too. So when you finish reading that chapter and watching the PowerPoint, you're going to see that you get a full definition of what Woodward and Denton, your textbook authors, think is persuasion. There are, you'll like the textbook because what they do is they provide you with 5 specific settings where persuasion takes place. And, they do it in a jury setting, in religious settings, like in a church or other places. in settings of war and the political aspects of war. And then basically they have one example that deals with persuasion in everyday life. So you want to make sure that you do that. There's a great little example in there about a campus food fight, which is kind of fun and interesting to look at. The other persuasive settings, what you'll talk about is what other types of settings besides the ones they give make it a setting that's open for persuasion to move in. And so these are some keys, and you'll see these in the PowerPoint too. Remember that persuasion is as much about the source as it is about the message. As much about the source as it is about the message. We'll talk a lot about that this semester. And we measure persuasion by how it affects others. What sort of effects do we get? That's effects with an E, all right? Effects meaning what has it done? What's the outcome of this? And never lose sight of the fact that persuasion is difficult. It's not an easy thing to do, all right? And you're going to learn a lot about that in these next 4.5 weeks, all right? And because of that, even minimal effects can be easy. And this is where I take you back to what I said at the outset about that persuasion is never about a one-shot deal. It's a many-shot deal, all right? And because of that, we have a problem that persuasion can easily stray from being truthful to deception. People try to be manipulative. So we'll talk some about the ethics of that and being able to actually predict what the outcome is going to be. You often can't, so be aware of that. We do talk about 3 types of communication in persuasion: pure information, pure expression, and pure persuasion. And you'll see a discussion about those in the PowerPoint. So pure information, pure expression, and pure persuasion. So when you talk about trying to decide what that is, what those 3 things are after watching the PowerPoint, you'll probably come up with some good examples from yourself that allow you to make some decisions about what's good persuasion and what's not. One last issue: self-persuasion. Now, I ask some questions about this in the forum and in the forum questions, and you'll see it on tests also. The idea of self-persuasion, and this is a long-time persuasive theorist's approach to persuasion. Ultimately, when persuasion has taken place, when that change has taken place, because we're rational thought processing beings, you have made that decision. So in essence, what we really are going to try to do, and we'll mention this many times this session, all right, is you're going to try and get people to self-persuade, to persuade themselves to make the change. If you make them make the change, which is coercion, that's not persuasion, all right, they won't stick with that decision. So what you want to think about doing is getting the information and the thoughts and the ethos, pathos, and logos, which we'll talk about, into their brain so they make the decision, all right? They make the decision and ultimately persuade themselves to change. So that's just an introduction to this introductory material. That's kind of humorous, isn't it? All right, so, and we will be going further than this, but this first week, it's just chapter 1. And again, you'll have 2 forum discussions this week. You don't have anything due until next week, which will be the first test. And then the first paper will be due the Monday after that. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I answer emails quickly, or you can call me. You can sign up on my Make an Appointment to meet with Dr. Moore, and we can do that either over the phone or in person. Y'all have a great 4th of July. Today's the day before the 4th of July. That's why I'm telling you that. You probably won't watch this till afterwards. Bye now.